Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I'm so happy you're with us today. Now, if you are a first-time listener, thank you for investing your time in our show. If you are a repeat listener, I so appreciate your support. And thanks for sharing the show with anyone you know who would benefit by becoming a more confident and compelling communicator using the power of story. Now, you are in for a treat today because we have TV host and media personality Cheryl Hunter with us. She has an unbelievable story about arriving in Europe as an 18-year-old to pursue a modeling career, but being kidnapped and left for dead. This horrifying incident gave life to her calling of helping people find their personal brand story through tragedy and triumph, to ultimately help them reach their fullest potential. So welcome to her story.
You know, there's quite a lot of time when you're just sitting around as a model or traveling and flying all over the world. And it's not nearly the glamorous business that people make it out to be. It's very lonely. At least it was for me. I kept myself also at arm's length from people after the kidnapping because I was terrified that somebody would learn somehow, like they would sense it on me, smell it on me, see it on me. They would know that I was damaged and ruined and filthy and used up and stupid more than anything, gullible. And so I just kept very distant and detached from people. But what I did do was right.
Cheryl Hunter has been featured worldwide by major media outlets including People Magazine, Goldcast, Dr. Phil, NBC News, Dr. Oz, CNN, Fox, PBS, and more. She believes in the potential that the right message can change the world. So in addition to writing and producing for HBO, CBS, Paramount Pictures, and NBC, Cheryl and her team of major media gatekeepers help mission-driven experts leverage the power of major media to get their important message, story, and businesses known by millions. Forbes magazine says that Cheryl has something very important to teach about reaching your fullest potential on this planet. So let's hear what that is as she joins us on the Business of Story. And be sure to stick around for the end of the show where Cheryl has a special offer for you. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome to the show.
Park, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, you have a pretty amazing media empire of both being on camera in lots of different, major news outlets, but also a PR firm, as I've got that right, that helps people expand their stories and how to. And I'm this guy that, I'm a sole proprietor here. I've got a virtual team, and I'm always trying to figure out how in the world can I get the Business of Story out there more in the media without having to hire a high-priced media professional? So we're going to cover all that today, but we're going to start with this idea about why your brand story is truly your superpower. And you are going to help walk us through that, starting with your backstory.
So it wasn't long ago that my work was, my day job was I wrote TV. I started by having my original plays developed by HBO, NBC, Fox, and then I sold television shows and had them and was a writer producer and had those.
What are some of those shows that we might be familiar with?
You can have an entire career writing television, and unless I'm happy to take a side jaunt through this, but there's a whole process that you go through where a show is purchased, and then it's shot, and then it's ordered, and you can make a great living in TV and not have your shows ordered, or you can staff and showrun and all kinds of different things on different shows. I've had shows produced and aired on CNN, PBS, et cetera. But I don't want to get too off track, but it wasn't that long ago that I was a network TV writer, and I had a message that I wanted to get out to the world in a big way, but I wasn't able to. I wanted to get that message out to the world via major media. I could see the power that major media had to alter our collective conversations, the collective human narrative, those water cooler moments where everyone in the nation or the world is talking about the same thing at the same time. A little girl falls down a well, to less important things that everyone's talking about at the same time. But the thought process at the time was, man, if I could get my work out, good work in helping people overcome adversity, if I could get that out to the world, it would make a huge difference. And it took me a decade. You talked about not wanting to hire a high-priced publicist. To me, I'm like, to save a decade, I would hire just about anybody. But how did I have something I wanted to give away in the first place? I grew up on a horse ranch in the remote Rockies of Colorado. We were in the flyover zone. And I'd lie on my back in the horse meadows, looking up at the sky and see the planes flying by. And I would think to myself, man, I want to be the girl in the plane, looking down at the girl lying here among the cows and horses on the ground. But in order to be her, the girl going places, I'd have to have some way to help people, something to give them. And all I could think of at the time was, I know how to ride horses, but they're better people than I am at that. I've got a coach, I've got somebody who helps me, so I'm not the best at it. I don't know what I could do.
Well, how old were you at the time?
Oh, I did this throughout my childhood,
Yeah,
but then I started concocting plans. I wanted to get out of this little mountain town. And one day I played hooky, went to the closest town with a store of any kind. I rode for an hour and a quarter on my mini bike, and I got a Glamour magazine, career advice for a teenage girl. And I looked, and they were talking about that they're always looking for models. And I didn't really give a darn about modeling, but I knew that there were no models in Rye or San Isabel, Colorado. So I thought that could be my plan to get out to the big city. And after all, I was already on the boys basketball team, so I was tall enough, I figured. So
what position did you play?
I was a guard.
Oh, yeah.
And
would you take him to the hoop? Would you just come in and say, "Get out of my way, Buster, I'm coming through"?
Sometimes they'd be like, what? There's a girl? But I think it was probably a function of what a small town I lived in, and more than my acumen on the court. However, I still started. But I thought, this may be for me. I'll figure it out. I just need to get someplace where they need models. I don't know where that is. Fashion all comes from Europe. I guess I should go there. I talked my best friend into going on a trip with me, and off we went. And Park, I'll tell you, no sooner did we get to France than a man with a big, fancy-looking camera around his neck walked up and said, "Hey, are you a model? I can make you one. Just come with me and my friend over there." And I thought, that doesn't seem like the smartest idea. But, I'm a tough, smart kid. I know how to wrestle a steer and drive a tractor trailer. I'll figure it out. I always do. I'll figure it out. My smarts and savvy as a teenage girl were nothing for these criminals. They kidnapped me. They took me to an abandoned construction site, held me there. You can fill in all the gory details with your mind with me and these criminals. But eventually, they decided to let me go. They dumped me on a spot of grass, bruised, beaten. They chopped my hair off. I mean, I was traumatized. And I had to figure out, how in the hell am I going to live? And the first decision I made, I didn't have anything remotely like this happen to me before. And I thought, well, I'm just going to pretend it didn't happen. Like that was the best I could come up with at the time.
And Cheryl, you must have been what, like 18 or something like
Yep.
this, late? And did they also take your friend that was traveling with you?
No, I embarrassed to say, but I ditched her because you see, she wanted to go home afterward, and I was bound and determined to find a way to stay in civilization in the big city. I didn't even care what big city. I just didn't want to go back to the horse ranch. It was wonderful as a little kid. But as I got older and I could read, I was reading books and seeing movies and reading magazines. I wanted to go someplace where there were people I wasn't related to by
Mhm.
blood. I mean, there were no signs of civilization from our ranch, literally, other than the plains. It could have been hundreds of years ago. We were miles away, 20 minutes away from Rye, Colorado, which nobody in Colorado even knows
Mhm.
where it is. It's like on the edge of the San Isabel National Forest. We were in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
I just couldn't imagine ever going back to begin with. And then once the whole kidnapping had happened, I thought, good God, if I end up going back there now, if I tell my parents, they'll insist that I come home. And I would die. I would implode. I can't go back and be left with this held between my ears, the captivity of the mind.
Mhm.
There, I can't make it. So I decided to become a model anyway. I
But
stayed in
this
the
all
city, but
happened when you first got to France? I mean, this
yep.
is like one of your very first experiences. So you went to France to advance your modeling career, and
Well,
somehow
I
they
went
pegged you when
on
you got off the
vacation
flight,
and
basically.
yeah, and say that one more time.
I mean, they just recognized something about you. I mean, it's just so weird that the universe would set this up to send you over there for your own ambition, and then these people mark you immediately, and this hell happens to you.
I mean, here we are, two wide-eyed teenage girls. We've got these absurdly large suitcases. I mean, you don't have to look too far to go. Tourist, naive tourist. Now,
Hmm.
since then, law enforcement has said, well, there were traffickers. Somehow the handoff went awry. You narrowly escaped.
Wow.
And just be grateful that's all it
So
was.
your friend went back home, but you remained in Europe?
I became a model.
Hmm.
Now, at the same time, I was dealing with this hell between my ears, and I had to figure out how to overcome. And at some point, I realized, look, I'm not the first person to go through adversity. I know that I could read a book on how to overcome, and I did. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, brilliant. But it wasn't enough for me. I needed to roll up my sleeves and figure out how to overcome. So I had said to my mom, I'm depressed, without saying why. And she said, do you mean bored? No, like actually depressed. She said, well, I don't know what you're dealing with, but there's this old adage that if you've got it bad, help someone who's got it worse. And I started volunteering at old age homes. And at first, I would just go there and listen, which was a godsend all around because no one listens to them. And because I then did not have to listen to the sort of shouting between my own ears of, I'm going to get back at these guys. This is what I'm going to do. And all that nonsense. And I just listened for a long time. And then I could see there were patterns between those who had gone through adversity, suffering, trauma, and had gone on to live happy, productive, fruitful lives, and those who understandably had gone through horrors and yet didn't. And I broke it down. I codified it and came up with what worked, and I applied it to myself, and it worked beautifully. And then I started finding other survivors of violent crime, rape, sexual assault, trafficking. I found them and worked with them on this. Just was my beta testing. worked beautifully with them. And I thought, I'm on to something. And this is when I was writing TV and said, I've got to find a way to give this away. Not just the education per se, but the knowledge, the understanding that we can overcome anything. I wrote a couple books on it. And to loop back finally to your initial question, Park, our story as a superpower. I was connected in television. I wrote TV, but I couldn't get my own message out to the world for years, like almost a decade. And part of it was because I still wasn't sharing my story. Sure, I was talking about how to overcome adversity, but like, who cares? With absent a context of, I did it, I suffered from this and you can too, it fell flat. And I started testing with sharing a story. And at first I had, even though I could write, I had none of the distinctions about sharing a personal story, a brand story that caused a desired outcome with an audience. And that's a different animal than simply writing well.
All right, so let me put this together a little bit. You made your way over to Europe. You had this horrific experience. You were trying to be a model. Were you successful in that? Did your modeling career take off? And how did that lead into your TV work?
I did become a successful model. I was the worldwide Coca-Cola girl. I was featured in every major magazine franchise. By the time I was 23, I'd lived all over the world and then eventually settled in New York. And it's not so much that it I don't know that it parlayed in any way into TV, but I found myself, there's quite a lot of time when you're just sitting around as a model or traveling and flying all over the world. And it's not nearly the glamorous business that people make it out to be. It's very lonely. At least it was for me. I kept myself also at arm's length from people after the kidnapping because I was terrified that somebody would learn somehow, like they would sense it on me, smell it on me, see it on me. They would know that I was damaged and ruined and filthy and used up and stupid more than anything, gullible. And so I just kept very distant and detached from people. But what I did do was write. I wrote everything down that I couldn't say to others, to myself. I started writing, and that was the real segue. That's what enabled me to finally create something that was sold. And
in that writing, I guess that was kind of your way of dealing with what had happened to you, what you were ashamed of, what you couldn't tell other people for fear of what they might then project upon you. And so essentially a diary, you were journaling, getting this stuff down. And at some point, you or someone must have said, hey, there's something in this that you need to share with the world.
Yes, it wasn't so much journaling, just outflow, just writing, because heaven forfend anyone would find it. Then they would know my horrible secret and that I brought it on myself, I feared, by being so stupid and gullible. But I just wrote. The connections and relationships that I was missing in real life, I was fabricating on the page and finding ways for people in those stories to connect deeply and express with one another and share life, and everything that was missing in life got to live out through that writing.
So take us to the moment then, Cheryl, when you said, wait a minute, I've got something here. I've got a treasure trove of experience and insights that I need to start sharing with people.
In the writing itself,
Yes.
Do you mean?
Yeah.
So I eventually moved to Los Angeles, And I did it in New York as well. Forgive me. Modeling only filled so much of my tanks. I mean, it's nice wearing nice clothes and all, but I'm a cowgirl. So really, I had more of a functional relationship to clothing, and travel was nice, but there had to be more. I was detached from people and standing there all day. Can you smile? Yes. Can you frown? Can you pout? How fulfilling was this, right? But I started thinking, what if I could, I was at first in the city of New York, the city of theater. What if I could stage a play? And at first I thought, well, I should know how to talk to actors. Maybe I'll go take an acting class and see what they say. And I actually ended up really enjoying it. It was a way to be self-expressed, but as somebody else, not as me. And I met actors and said, I'm going to stage a play. And I did that in New York and in Los Angeles. But I'll tell you, some of the actors, they wouldn't show up on time. They wouldn't get along with each other. They would demand something or other more than the other. And I just thought, this is a lot of work. But I ended up, for whatever reason, my plays became quite popular. And at a certain point, I finally said, you know what? I'm tired of bringing in all the actors and having it all depend on them. And I just staged the things myself as one-woman shows. And those are the ones that I initially had developed. HBO developed one. I was under contract with NBC and with Fox. And it was, I was just blessed. The audience enjoyed them. I got some good write-ups, and it sort of started from there.
I mean, this is pretty heady stuff for a cowgirl from Rye, Colorado. What did your mom and dad and your neighbors say? Oh my goodness.
Well, shoot, my folks came out and, would support and see everything. I'll tell you, it's so funny. I had things developed and staged in New York and LA, two big cities, but one theater company in this little remote town of Creede, Colorado, and they've got this fantastic repertory theater that's been there for close to 100 years, had seen my story. It was published in some paper, and they were like, hey, would you like to come to Colorado? It wasn't until I finally went to Colorado that folks were like, oh, so you really are doing this writing thing, okay, I thought that was quite funny.
I can hear the cowgirl coming out in you right there. That's so great. So Forbes magazine wrote, Cheryl has something very important to teach about reaching your fullest potential on the planet. And this kind of speaks to that your brand story is your superpower. Can you share what you mean by that?
So I'd like to just quickly tie up a couple loose ends. Mm-hmm. So once I got, it took me a decade to get my own message out to the world about how to overcome adversity and that it's possible. Once I did, and really got my message out there in a big way, millions and hundreds of millions of people saw. And I said to myself, there's an industry dedicated to helping people overcome adversity. I'm going to step back and leave that to the mental health professionals. What I saw on my journey of bringing my own message to the world is that nothing exists to help mission-driven entrepreneurs share their message with the world in a big way via major media. And if it took me a decade as a national TV writer, people don't stand a snowball's chance in beep.
In Rye, Colorado.
To say on the ranch. What'd you say?
In Rye, Colorado.
In Rye, Colorado. Well, there is snowball chance in hell, my father used to say. But I thought without somebody guiding them through, so I gathered together TV directors, producers, journalists, and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to rally around these people with a mission that want to make the world a better place with their work, and we're going to help them get a platform and a stage and a voice out there. So now that's what I'm doing, but I could see for myself the stumbling block was between invisible and visible was sharing a story, but sharing it in the right way. And I had a client it's a husband and wife. They're college planners from Atlanta, and they came to us in the height of COVID because nobody wanted to go to college. It was such a challenge at the time. Parents didn't want to send their kids in case classes were going to resume in person, and kids didn't want to go if it wasn't in person. It was this real conundrum, and there was the uncertainty of what was happening in the world. And they said after a decade in business, they were going to shut their doors. They didn't know how to keep alive. And when they came to us, the husband said, it's a husband and wife, she'd gone to college, he hadn't. And he said, we need to keep the fact that I didn't go to college hidden. We should all sign an NDA or something, because people can never find that out. And I was like, okay, tell me more. This is where it's getting interesting. Why? Well, I'm one of 6 kids, so that quintessential mother. Quintessential son of a immigrant mother, Filipina mother who couldn't, was working multiple jobs, couldn't keep food on the table. His father had passed, and she was doing everything. College? How are we going to eat? I couldn't go to college, so I made certain that no other kid suffers that fate. And I was like, just hold on a minute.
That's your story, right?
Would you, if you were a kid getting ready to go to college, wouldn't you want this guy to work with you? If you were a parent of that kid, this is the most compelling thing you have. And truly, he wanted us to sign an NDA to not share it. And I was like, okay, now I know we're truly onto something. But so often, people don't want to share their story, or they do, or they don't know which pieces to share. If you've been, I find there's 2 sort of camps of people in terms of expertise. One, you studied expertise. You are a medical doctor. You learned that in school. And 2, lived experience. You may, for example, we've got a client who was a former gold medalist in the World Games, a platform diver, Olympic bound, extraordinary. He was groomed and trafficked by the coaches and those entrusted with his care as a young athlete. And he now, from the TED Talks to he's addressed Congress, he's profiled by Time magazine. I mean, he went from when he came to us, no one believed him, to now the FBI is working with him to help educate agents on what trafficking looks like. And it's, he's got lived experience, whether you got lived experience or educated, book experience, both are valid, but sometimes people don't know how to share the story. In the case of John Michael, this platform diver, sharing the story initially would leave people worried and concerned for him, or not believing. And we've taught him how to share the work he does now, so that, you can really guide the way, not just what your audience is thinking, but the way in which they're thinking with story. I know you're a master storyteller, so and a student of the whole craft. But if you have got lived experience and you lead with that up front, oftentimes the audience will be worried or concerned for you, and that's then what they'll be thinking, rather than the triumph or the victory or what it is that you're doing right now. So it's more helpful to start with, today I fill in the blanks. How I got here was, and then some piece about how what you do is different, new, front edge of the bell curve, revolutionary, but only in as much as it serves the audience. Because mostly the problem with a story, through no fault of our own, when we go to tell it, is we talk about our attributes, and people don't care about that.
Well, a few things here I find so interesting. Number one, you are coaxing out of your clientele their troubled stories. At least they view them as being troubled stories, just like yours had to be coaxed out of you because you were afraid of the shame and guilt and how people might look at you until you said, well, wait a minute, no, that's a part of my life. Let's talk about this. And so it brings it to the forefront. Last week on our show, we had legendary screenwriting coach, story consultant, Robert McKee on.
Wow.
And it was an interview I did with him, 6 years ago. I was listening to it and I thought it is so good, his insights, that I had to pull it out of the archives. I, tweaked it a little bit on it, brought it back, but he said something really important. And I asked him, I go, why in corporate world, in the business world, are people so shy about telling stories? And he said, and it's to your point, he goes, because they're afraid of the negative. They are told, they are coerced into, you will say nothing wrong about the brand. Everything is stellar here. And everybody today knows that that's bullshit. It's not. And we all have our trials and tribulations. And it is in those trials, I believe, when you talk about that, you get your audience leaning in, because storytelling is an educational tool. It's like, what could I learn that happened to Cheryl? What could I learn that happened to Park that I would do in case I'm ever in that situation? It's a pure survival mechanism. So if you really want to get the attention of that primal limbic survival emotional portion of our brain, the decision-making part of our brain, take it to a bad place and then share with it how you overcame that, because it's listening intently in the background, and it's so powerful in business this day and age. And to the second thing that really struck me is you and I wouldn't be here. I'm older than you. So when I started in the advertising world, the only brands you ever heard about were the ones that had the big money to advertise. The rest of us, nobody knew who we were, our personal brand, our professional brand, or whatever. Now, in this day and age, with obviously social media and whatnot, and a lot of our listeners can't really even appreciate the fact that this democratization of our ability to tell and expand our story the world over. Like you said, you wrote for HBO and NBC and all these great TV stations. Well, we all have our own TV stations now. So we got to get back to, and because we have that, people need, and they look and seek for authenticity, and they know the moment you're bullshitting them. And if you don't cover the bad stuff with the good stuff, you're missing out as a storyteller.
Boy, you have such insight into story. It's profound. That whole piece about the decision-making part of the brain and engaging that. It is, a story evokes such a visceral response. I mean, since time immemorial, it's how we've learned. It's how we've come together. It's how we've taught. It's how we've conveyed lessons and instruction of any kind. I mean, since we sat around making pictographs on the on the cave walls, and to be able to use it now is so important. And I think part of the paradox is, with attention spans becoming so short, courtesy of short clips on TikTok,
Yeah.
it's like we flicker in and out of a story so fast that oftentimes it doesn't have really the time to arc, the time to draw us in. And I hope that we don't lose that deep, profound connection that story provides us. There's just these flashbacks of to times gone by, whether it's with names and all the young kids being given these beautifully old-fashioned names from 110 years ago, or affinity for vinyl. It's whatever that is. But let's hope that the true power of story, in whatever form, continues to be something that instructs and unites us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our subconscious limbic brain has not really evolved appreciably since our ancestors navigated and survived the savannah. It's the same brain that we are using to try to navigate and survive this onslaught of communication. And that's one of the big things that we preach here at the Business of Story is you can tell that story. And okay, so take a minute, but you can still have an arc to it. And of course, we teach the and, but, therefore, which uses the three forces of story, as we call it, agreement, contradiction, consequence, that plays to that problem solving, decision making, buying limbic brain. And you can do that in short form. But I'm with you that, boy, you don't want to lose that long form, because that still is how our brain makes meaning of the world. One other thing I will say about that, you shared, and I want to thank you for sharing that horrific event in your life. You could have gone into greater detail, taken a couple more minutes, and not that I'm asking you to do that, but we as the listener would have been right alongside of you. We would have maybe not felt to the degree you felt the horror and the terror going on, but we would experience it. We would get goosebumps. We'd bring a tear to our eye. We would feel these things as if we were actually participating in that particular story, in that particular event in your life. And that is true of any events, the highs and the lows and everything in between. And as a brand, we should not lose sight of the fact of how powerful those personal stories are. And I guess that's what you mean by your brand being your superpower. Your brand story that is uniquely your own is your superpower to connect with people.
Truly, when we reveal, like you'd said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the polished up, perfect version, it allows people's humanity, that deepest part of us, to really connect with that of the other. And so often, I was on social media last night looking for a location, and I see someone come up in my feed who's got a newborn, is like smiling and perfectly made up. And I'm thinking, oh God, I don't look that polished and made up ever. It was a feat today to put on lipstick, but I'm thinking, with a newborn and a puppy, how on earth? And there's this polished up facade that we've now become indoctrinated to vis-a-vis social media. But I find I really connect with someone who says, oh God, today was a really tough morning. The baby threw up on me, and this happened, and this is all before I got 1 ounce of coffee into me. So, it's like, oh man, can I relate? That response, that yes, me too, it has the power to galvanize people into a movement. And back to the previous point, it's not that we can't have a story arc in a short form, but so often a prank supplants that. If it's just something funny that goes viral, we start to think that's the point of video and story, as opposed to, no, the true compelling galvanizing force that story has behind it. One of our clients is a medical doctor and neurologist from Savannah who invented a medical device. This was back during COVID as well, that would keep healthcare practitioners safe when treating a contaminated patient. And he got it patented. He owns a chain of urgent care facilities employing 1,100 doctors and wanted to keep everybody safe, but the FDA wouldn't push it through. And he was spending an inordinate amount on Google ads and trying to create a groundswell movement, but it's not the form for it. People weren't getting involved. They were just reading some stuff, rather than we had him start to just tell the story. This is what I've seen with COVID, and this is a way we could keep people protected. And do you have someone in your family you'd like to keep protected? And whether it's the patient or the healthcare worker. And do you know, he started this groundswell movement. His local representatives got on board. The Department of Defense stepped in. I mean, this groundswell movement happened through story that he was telling. He later also addressed Congress speaking about COVID and our response to it. And it's all the power of story, of truly connecting heart to heart with another by telling the good and the bad.
Yeah, well, and that's why I think of it as the very first technology that we had, again, when we were the Homo sapiens cruising around Africa reading Sapiens. I just love Novel Harari's Sapiens. And he said, we are the only beings that actually think, plan, organize, and act in story. Because every time you were trying to get someone to buy into something, it could be your vision, your mission, it could be your product, your service, or whatever, you were actually asking them to buy into a fictional story because you haven't delivered for them yet. So you're painting the picture of what tomorrow could be, which is utter fiction until you make it a reality and you deliver on those promises in the stories you tell. So to me, that's what makes it so fundamentally powerful, is that we create fictions every day in our life, and us as brands and businesses and service providers, is we have to deliver on those fictions and make them nonfiction, make them a reality through story.
Boy, the way you think is really phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I'm operating on about 2.5 hours of sleep last night, so maybe that's it. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express, so maybe that's why. So,
No.
Cheryl, I think we've got a good sense of the superpower story. People can appreciate that, and they just have to summon the courage to be able to tell it. But now let's talk about, how do we scale it? How do you build a groundswell movement with your story?
Well, it's it's funny. A couple of days ago, I have a great ad agency. They throw out possibilities once in a while. And one of them said on our weekly call, "Hey, can you create a video on how to go viral? Maybe a training, something you sell like that?" And I said, "Why?" It's kind of antithetical to everything we do. People come to us because they've gone viral and they can't monetize it, or they can't get lightning to strike twice, or they don't know how it happened, or maybe it was something. Even the most recent person I spoke to had like 17 million views, but it was some random thing that had nothing to do with his brand. So it's not benefiting him in any way. But I'm curious, I said to the ads agency, why? And they said, well, more people seem to be searching for that than how to get on TV. I was like, huh. Okay, so maybe we're misguided. I get it. Things go viral in this world in which we're living. But one of the things we find is that it oftentimes isn't tied to a brand. I thought, let me take a deeper dive into this. So I bought a couple of courses that are out there on how to go viral. Do you know, there were totally unrelated people or companies that sold this. Do you know both of them started with, you're going to deliver some kind of eye-grabbing, attention-grabbing prank. And I thought, how many businesses out there want to be known for a prank? None. I mean, maybe, but it's not, it doesn't seem like the point. But here's what I've found does work. You've got people that serve a similar audience that you do, who have built a large platform or audience, and your message could be a massive value to those people. Now, I don't care if it's an individual who's got millions of followers, or Dr. Phil or NBC Nightly News. It's what works with virality and being able to cause it with some predictability is to use someone else's audience to do that. I did a video for Goalcast. I didn't even do it. They published it, and it's had tens of millions of views, and they made it without me even knowing about it. And it helped get the message out of, you can overcome adversity. You can be better for the challenges you face. I'm blessed that they did that. But how do you do that? You find a platform, whether it's, again, an individual and a media platform who serves the same person or people, demographic, and ask yourself, what could you provide that's unique and distinct from what they're already providing? And then how do you make it about the audience entirely so that your message is really in service of them rather than self-promotional?
Mm-hmm.
And that it actually leaves them with something they can put into action in their lives now. You'll see sometimes on different newscasts around the country, they'll say, news you can use. And the gatekeepers on our team will always say, we need to provide value for the audience. We need to have a reason that they continue to tune in. So if you were going to distill it down to 2 or 3 things, what could you give them that will enhance the living of their lives day to day?
So that question of virality, to me, seems to be a very surfacey ambition, in that I just want to get millions upon millions of views. And, so you get them, great. It strokes your ego, but there may be 1% of those people that you can actually help, right? Number 2, virality, in my opinion, is very lucky, because you just don't know what's going to go viral and what's not going to go viral. You, from what I'm hearing you say, is you are trying to stack the deck in your favor. And I love that idea about, don't try to be everything to the world. Go and find a watering hole of people that are already in need of maybe something that you have, that you are not selling yourself on them. You're just sharing with them a value or a tool that is going to make their life better. That then may go viral within that small market. You may not get tens of millions of views on it, but you might get several 100,000, which is its own virality. And the one time I had really experienced this, not for myself, but for our son, Parker, the filmmaker, he and his 2 buddies went to Burning Man. They had gone there a couple of years. And in 2011, they actually made the very first produced film that came out of Burning Man. They were the producers on it. They weren't hired to do it. They just said, hey, we've got an art project. And what they did is they took Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go. They had it recited by all the different characters at Burning Man, and it's called Oh, the Places You'll Go at Burning Man. They launched it, and they launched it 4 months after that particular Burning Man. And I sat there one holiday weekend and watched it launch, and watched it go tick, 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 and watched the amazing amounts of comments that came in and people resharing that video. And they had 1 million views in like no time at all. And that's when I realized they've got it because they're speaking to the Burning Man community, or the burner wannabes that haven't been there, but want to have a look-see into what is Burning Man. And in this case, it wasn't a documentary. It was an art project, as Burning Man is famous for. And, today, when I just looked at it the other day, it's got millions upon millions of views, and it has people coming back and said, I watch this 2 or 3 times every year, or when I'm down, it always puts a smile on my face. It always brings a tear to my eye. And to me, I thought that is like the ideal petri dish for virality. When you're delivering the goods to an audience, not just to the overall world. And here's the catch on all this, Cheryl, is my wife Michelle and I were in Melbourne, Australia, pre-COVID. So it was March of 2019. We were downtown in the shopping district, and voila, here's this crazy Dr. Seuss store. I'd never seen one in my life. You go in, you can buy original prints, you can buy books, you can buy, even the guys in there dressed up as like Thing 1 and Thing 2 or Dr. Seuss characters. And I happened to mention to this guy, and I'm guessing he was mid-40s. And I asked him, I said, have you ever heard of all the places you'll go at Burning Man? And he stopped in his tracks and he goes, that is the favorite movie I have ever seen in my life. And I go, well, our son was a part of the 3-person team that produced and directed and made that happen. And he pulled it up on his screen. He goes, I show this 3 or 4 times a week to people coming in my store. Oh. And then I said, well, you've got to let me do a little video. And he said, yes, congrats, Parker. And in that wonderful Australian voice, love Burning Man, all the places you'll go at Burning Man. And so it just, again, underscored to me the virality came by speaking to a watering hole of people that need what you've got.
So beautifully said, and forwarding whatever they're committed to, right, is helping them move the conversation forward in some way. So like the people who return to it whenever they're looking for a boost, they return to it when they want to uplift those in their lives. It's just, we take for granted the things that we provide sometimes because we're so in the soup. We know it so well, but if someone hasn't experienced that and it's the first time, it really can be helpful. There's a piece about providing value that I think might be helpful as you're looking to provide value for an audience. And your son Parker in the film demonstrated so beautifully. It's this kind of crazy, wild, experience at Burning Man, and then juxtaposed against a children's book, there's an unexpected juxtaposition there. And that's really helpful in providing value. I'm also often telling our clients to try and myth bust or shoot holes through what is currently done. If you were a nutrition expert and got a segment on TV and they asked you, well, what are things that our audience at home can do? And you said diet and exercise. I'd be like, what? I saw a New Year's segment once and they were like, how do you keep your resolutions? And the expert said, write them down. I was, well, come on now. They brought you on TV for that? Give me something counterintuitive. But, if it was like, throw the diet out the window. Don't exercise a day in your life until you're really moved to do it, and then jump for joy. I'm making this up. I'm obviously not a nutrition expert, but it's the unexpected that becomes so sticky, and that when people remember it, they're far more apt to apply it, and then they want more. So what a beautiful story. Oh, the places you'll go.
You'll have to go check it out after we talk. It will bring a tear to your eye. The one last thing I'll say about it, I think they did a brilliant job with the music. The composer, Darius Holbert, who I actually got to now compose all of my music on my show, they sent a thing out on Facebook and they said, look, we're doing this little thing from Burning Man. We have no money. We are looking for a composer. He reached out. He said, I'm interested. They sent him a little 2-minute trailer. He, within a day or two, wrote the soundtrack that said, you're hired. And he wrote this piece. I gave him the finished piece. He wrote all the music to it, sent it in. They didn't change a thing. It is so beautiful. When you hear that music, in and of itself, you can close your eyes, listen to the words, and the music behind it is spectacular. It just all came together.
Forward.
So Cheryl, what are the services that you offer to help people? Number one, to help them identify what their brand story superpower is and how to communicate that. And then number two, what is it that you provide that's different out there that helps them scale that story to really build a groundswell?
Well, everybody's heard of PR or publicity, and I've hired many of them. But one of the things that was missing for me initially was when I got to my first interview, which I never did through a publicist, I got on my own, but I got there and realized, wait, here I am with the IFB, the device in the ear that sometimes, the person is out in the field and they go, Fred, can you hear me? Fred, hey, can you hear me? That thing. It's a 30-second delay. that was one of the millions of things I did not know. I wasn't media trained. I knew something about writing media, but I sure as heck didn't know anything about appearing. And so one of the things we do is media train people so that they knock it out of the park right from the get-go. But there's, the way current publicity is done, I mean, I'm sure there's wonderful publicists out there who everywhere, like there's wonderful people in every profession, but there's in publicity, their number one asset is the relationships. And if you get a gig through a publicist, they will send a proxy there to interface on your behalf. You cannot speak to the host, the anchor, the interviewer, unless it's during the interview and then someone else speaks in your stead. It's just such a weird construct. I'm supposed to be interviewed. I can't say hello. It's like, it's because they want to protect the relationships. I want our people to build relationships and not only know how to do that, but it's like our Rolodex of gatekeepers, we put them in front of one another so that they get to know them. I think that actually works far better. I want to bring great messages out to the world and have I firmly believe that every problem we are currently faced with in this world could be solved if the expert who had a solution had a platform as well. And I want to bring those people out to the world. So I think I think there's a lot of ways that publicity kind of needs a reset, and I think that's what we're doing here is giving it PR version 2.0.
Well, you've been
Empowering the
very,
expert.
very gracious, and excuse me, I got a frog in my throat.
There was once this wonderful woman. I thought of her as quite elderly because I was in my late teens when I came across her. But there was a child having a meltdown outside of a public restroom, and this woman said something as a lot of us were waiting in line. She'd said, "We're all confined to a human body." And I tell you, whenever my body does something that I kind of don't prefer, I remind myself of that lovely woman saying that, and it's true.
We are. So thank you for your patience on that frog attack in my throat. You've got a very gracious offer that you are sharing with our listeners today with the free media audit. What does that entail?
So I've got media concierges on my team, and they roll up their sleeves. It's a short call. I know everybody's time is valuable, but it's looking at what's the media you have done, if any. Where do you want to go? There'll be a gap. What will make a difference? We'll diagnose on that call what right now is stopping you from getting the media that you want, and then give you a training that previously we'd only ever given clients so that you're able to just put something into use right away. And it's our the people that have these calls find them incredibly valuable and then give you next steps. I do free trainings quite often. I'll do live master classes, and I like to I like to help people with great messages get them to the world. So
And you
that's
can
one of the
find that
things.
media training at cherylhunter.com/media audit. And it'll be the link will be in the show notes. One final question for you, Cheryl. I really appreciate your time being here today. This has been a blast. Let's go back to identifying that superpower brand story. And the one question I have for you is, what's the one thing our listeners could do right after listening to this to go and, I don't know, unearth, corral, in your terms, your superpower brand story? What can they do?
So often we find with our clients that it's the thing that they want to hide that is the crux of the superpower. So, the teacher who was dyslexic, like in the case of Danny and Karen, the college planner who he had not gone to college. It's there's some piece there, a breakdown. I overcame this. I built the business because I knew there had to be a better way. The piece that we would normally hide is access to the real gold.
Interesting. You just have to have the courage to do it, I guess. The self-examination to pull it up and the courage to say, oops, I'm fallible. Here's what's happened. But here's how it's informed me and what I do today and how I can help you because of it.
I mean, perfection is a great thing to aspire to, but how often does it occur? It doesn't, right? There's what we all can share is the challenges, the failures that we've overcome. That's inspiring. That unites us and has the power to galvanize an audience.
Awesome. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for being here. And when was the last time you were in Rye, Colorado? Do you get back out to that little town anymore?
I was there last week seeing my father.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear you haven't completely bailed on that. Colorado's a beautiful state.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Park.
Thanks for listening and sharing this edition of The Business of Story. Last week, I replayed an amazing interview I had with legendary Hollywood screenwriting coach and story consultant Robert McKee on the power of storytelling in business. Next week, I will feature an encore presentation of my interview with the author of one of my favorite books, The Storytelling Animal, Jonathan Gottschall. Jonathan and I explore why stories make us human and how to use them to move that storytelling ape sitting across from you. The work from these two storytelling greats has hugely impacted how I teach storytelling to business leaders. If I can help you and your people grow as more confident and compelling storytellers, then please shoot me a note over to park@businessofstory.com. Or you can start right now with our ABTs of Agile Communications micro-training course at businessofstory.com/ABT. And now I'd like to give a big shout out to Marissa Hill, who has been helping me with marketing and community development long before we launched the Business of Story back in 2016. Thanks for all you do, Marissa. I truly appreciate it. I'd also like to say thanks to Caden Howell, who's been doing an incredible job editing our show for the past 4 years. Thanks, Mo. I appreciate you too. And of course, a big thanks to Darius Holbert, who composed our custom theme music here at the Business of Story. Just love it. Now, as you grow as a more persuasive and influential storyteller, listening to this show and/or using the resources on our site, please remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.